You think a mop gives you clearance to stand there? The CEO's voice crackled through the security speaker, sharp and public. You're paid to clean floors, not wander outside my boardroom. He paused outside the executive floor, and the CEO saw it. On the security feed, the powerful executive mocked the night cleaner, calling him a trespasser who forgot his place. The cleaner didn't argue. He simply studied the monitors. Minutes later, the entire building would depend on him. Because this isn't about cleaning offices, it's about unseen power. Before I show you the exact moment when the ransomware countdown hit 0 in the boardroom. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What was really happening beneath the surface wasn't about a janitor drifting too close to luxury. It was about a man trained to notice patterns others ignored. A man who understood that danger rarely announced itself politely. He lowered his eyes as security approached, offering no resistance, no explanation. Adrian Vale had learned long ago that pride wasted energy better used elsewhere. The uniform clung to his broad shoulders, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs, rubber gloves tucked into his belt. To anyone watching the grainy feed from the penthouse office, he looked exactly like what they expected. A night cleaner who didn't understand boundaries. Yet his gaze had lingered on something far more important than polished marble or biometric locks. Inside the boardroom beyond that restricted door, 12 executive terminals glowed against the darkness. Reflections bounced faintly across the glass wall, flickering in patterns too rhythmic to be random. He'd seen that cadence before. Not in office towers, but in windowless military facilities where digital warfare unfolded in silence. Move him along, the CEO ordered through the comm system. I don't pay people to loiter. The guards shifted awkwardly. Adrian offered a small nod and pushed his cart toward the service corridor. Wheels squeaked against marble, echoing beneath vaulted ceilings lined with abstract art worth more than his yearly salary. The scent of lemon disinfectant trailed behind him, clean and ordinary, masking the faint metallic hum that vibrated through the floor. Upstairs, Roland Pierce leaned back in his leather chair, watching from a wall of monitors. The skyline glittered behind him, private balcony, imported scotch, tailored suit jacket draped across Italian furniture. Control was his comfort. Cameras were his assurance that every employee knew their place. Down below, the cleaner stepped into the narrow service hallway where fluorescent lights buzzed like restless insects. Pipes ran exposed along concrete walls. Here, power didn't pose for photographs. It leaked, hummed, and occasionally sparked. He paused again, but this time beside a maintenance terminal half hidden behind stacked supply crates. A thin red icon blinked in the corner of the small screen. Most would have ignored it. He didn't. His fingers hovered, not touching, just observing. The blinking wasn't erratic. It pulsed with deliberate timing. 5 seconds bright, 3 seconds dim. A handshake signal. A reconnaissance sweep. Footsteps echoed. He straightened instantly, pushing the cart forward as if nothing had caught his attention. He'd learned restraint in far harsher places than this. Acting too soon could make things worse. In his pocket, his phone vibrated softly. A photo of his daughter filled the screen when he checked it during break, a gap-toothed smile beneath hospital fluorescent lights. Lila had texted earlier through her tablet, "Don't work too hard, Dad. I need you strong." He inhaled slowly. This job wasn't about dignity anymore. It was about insurance coverage, prescription refills, stability. Losing it over a confrontation would be reckless. But ignoring what he'd just seen could cost far more than employment. Above him, the building's systems whispered in frequencies executives never noticed. Cooling fans accelerating, data packets surging, faint glitches crawling across encrypted dashboards. Rollins' laughter drifted faintly from a nearby monitor in the security office as he replayed the footage of the wandering janitor for a late-night guest. "Can't trust anyone these days," the CEO joked. "Even cleaners think they belong upstairs. Belong." The word settled heavy in Adrian's chest, though his expression remained neutral. Belonging had once meant classified clearances, encrypted briefings, responsibility measured in national security. Now it meant a time card stamped at midnight and rubber-soled shoes squeaking against polished floors. Still, training never truly faded. It adapted. He finished the corridor methodically, wiping glass panels until they reflected only darkness. But beneath that calm surface, calculations moved fast. If the pulse he'd seen was what he suspected, tonight wasn't going to stay quiet. Somewhere deep inside Pierce Global's network, something had just knocked on the door, and someone upstairs was too busy watching the wrong camera to notice. In the penthouse, Roland Pierce swirled amber liquid and crystal and smirked at the replay paused on his screen, the image of a cleaner halted outside his boardroom. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Give them a uniform and they start imagining promotions." Below, in the service corridor, the man with the mop kept walking. The hum in the walls deepened. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it carried weight, like pressure building behind a sealed door. He felt it through the soles of his shoes, a subtle vibration that didn't match the building's usual nighttime rhythm. Cooling systems were cycling harder than necessary. Data traffic spiked after hours only when something was wrong, or someone was testing defenses. He turned into the janitorial closet and shut the door quietly behind him. The cramped space smelled of bleach and old paper towels. Fluorescent light flickered overhead. He leaned his cart against the wall and exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a brief second. Focus. His mind replayed the pulse pattern from the terminal. 5 seconds bright. 3 seconds dim. A reconnaissance handshake, likely probing executive-level credentials. Whoever was behind it wasn't smashing doors, they were mapping the building's digital blueprint. He stepped back into the hallway, pushing the cart toward the Et wing. Glass offices lined the corridor, empty at this hour except for one. Marisol Chen sat alone beneath cold white light. Her reflection doubled in the window. Screens covered her desk, logs, graphs, system health monitors. Her shoulders were tight, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. She didn't look up when he passed, but her jaw clenched as another alert chimed. He slowed. On one of the monitors, a small red flag blinked, briefly, then vanished. Not random. He kept moving. A cleaner staring at screens was already suspicious enough. But as he mopped near the doorway, he caught fragments of her whispered frustration. "Why are you spiking now? That's not scheduled maintenance." She ran another diagnostic. The system responded clean, too clean. Upstairs, Roland leaned forward as an assistant entered with a tablet. "Tomorrow's investor stream is locked in," she said. "Global access. We're projecting record viewership." "Good," he replied smoothly. "Everything spotless. No surprises. If only he understood what spotless really meant." The man in the corridor finished the Et hallway and headed toward the executive elevators. A security guard glanced at him but said nothing this time. Humiliation had already been delivered, no need for repetition. Inside the elevator shaft, cables thrummed. He listened. There it was again, that faint digital stutter beneath the mechanical noise, like static beneath music. Subtle, disciplined. Whoever was probing this system knew what they were doing. His phone vibrated once more. He stepped into the stairwell and checked it. A photo message from Leela, her homework spread across the kitchen table. "I saved you the last cookie," she'd written. A small heart followed. He smiled despite the tightness in his chest. She had no idea how close everything always felt to tipping. Her treatments weren't optional. Neither was rent. He typed back quickly, "Be home soon, don't eat my cookie." Then he stared at the stairwell wall, jaw tightening. If this was what he thought it was, tomorrow's broadcast would be the perfect target. Maximum exposure. Maximum leverage. Ransomware didn't just steal data, it stole reputation. And reputation was Pierce Global's currency. He could ignore it. Finish his shift. Go home. Let the executives and their security teams handle whatever storm arrived. But he'd seen this kind of storm before. Ignoring reconnaissance was how disasters began. Back in the penthouse, Roland replayed the camera clip one more time before switching feeds. The cleaner was now just another moving dot in the building. Insignificant. Replaceable. Schedule a meeting with facilities, he told his assistant. We'll remind them about boundaries. Yes, ma'am, the assistant said automatically, correcting herself under his sharp look. Sir, control mattered to him more than accuracy. Downstairs, the elevator doors opened and the night cleaner stepped into the lobby. Polished marble stretched wide beneath hanging chandeliers. Reflections shimmered across the floor as he guided the mop in smooth arcs. Behind the security desk, multiple screens cycled through feeds: parking garage, executive floor, server room. Server room. He angled his body slightly, pretending to wring out the mop while his eyes flicked toward one monitor. A quick flash, red, then green. Then normal again. Too quick for most to register. Not for him. He straightened, heart rate steady but elevated. The handshake pattern was escalating, testing deeper access points. This wasn't random noise, it was a countdown beginning to breathe. He pushed the cart toward the revolving doors, finishing his visible duties. The glass panels reflected a man in worn boots and latex gloves. But beneath that reflection was something far less ordinary. If you're still here, subscribe with the bell on, because what's about to unfold inside this building will prove that power isn't always sitting in the corner office. He glanced once more at the glowing tower rising into the night sky. Tomorrow, those same cameras that mocked him might capture something very different, and somewhere deep within Pierce Global's network, the knocking had just turned into a quiet, patient push. The elevator doors slid open onto the executive level with a soft chime that felt too delicate for what was brewing beneath the surface. He stepped out alone, wheels of the cleaning cart rolling over plush carpet that swallowed sound. The air up here always felt different, cooler, filtered, scented faintly with imported wood polish and expensive restraint. Inside the penthouse office, Roland Pierce adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt while scanning tomorrow's investor briefing. Numbers lined the screen in confident rows: growth projections, global expansion, digital resilience. He liked that phrase, digital resilience. It sounded unbreakable. A small notification flickered in the corner of his monitor. System latency spike, 0.8 seconds. It vanished almost immediately. He dismissed it without a second thought. Down the hall, Marisol's fingers hovered over her keyboard as another minor anomaly appeared in her logs. Packet duplication from an external source. Then silence. That's not possible, she murmured under her breath. She ran a trace. Clean. She checked firewall integrity. Stable. Still, the pattern nagged at her. The signals were subtle. Too subtle for random malfunction. Like someone knocking lightly on a door just to confirm it existed. In the corridor outside the boardroom, the cleaner slowed his pace. He could feel the rhythm now. Not through vibration, but through memory. Reconnaissance. Mapping ports. Testing response times. Whoever was behind it was disciplined, patient. The kind who preferred silent entry over brute force. He wiped down a long stretch of glass wall, eyes lowering respectfully whenever a camera swiveled. But his peripheral vision stayed sharp. Inside the boardroom, 12 terminals sat dark, waiting for morning. He paused at the edge of the hallway, not close enough to trigger suspicion, not far enough to lose signal awareness. The subtle flicker from beneath the conference table caught his eye. One of the docked executive tablets glowed faintly before dimming again. 5 seconds bright, 3 seconds dim. There it was again. His pulse remained steady, but a cold certainty formed in his chest. This wasn't just probing anymore. This was timing. Upstairs, Rollins' assistant entered quietly. "We've confirmed all global connections for tomorrow's stream. Asia-Pacific markets will tune in live." "Good," he replied smoothly. "Everything secure?" "It says yes. Of course they did." Marisol leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The logs were too clean. Every irregularity erased itself before she could isolate it. That wasn't malfunction. That was concealment. She stood abruptly and stepped into the hallway, nearly colliding with the man pushing a mop bucket past her door. "Sorry," she said automatically, barely glancing at him. He gave a small nod. But her eyes lingered for half a second longer than usual. "You ever notice the cooling system running heavier at night?" she asked absently, mostly thinking out loud. He hesitated just enough to seem natural. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "Usually means something's working harder than it should." She studied him now, curiosity flickering. "Servers are fine," she replied, though it sounded like she was convincing herself. "Hope so," he answered, tone neutral. "Tomorrow's a big day." Her brow furrowed slightly. "How do you?" He had already continued down the hallway, wheels squeaking softly. Back in the penthouse, Roland opened the building's master security dashboard. Camera feeds cycled automatically. Lobby, parking garage, executive corridor, the cleaner again. Still lingering on that floor, Roland's jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Doesn't learn." He tapped into the intercom system. "Security. Escort the janitor off executive level." Now, the message crackled faintly through hidden speakers in the hallway. He heard it. So did Marisol. She stepped back into her office, unsettled. 2 guards approached from opposite ends of the corridor. Their footsteps were heavier this time, deliberate. "Sir," one of them called out firmly, "you need to head downstairs." He raised his hand slightly, compliant, calm. "Just finishing the glass. You finished enough." Under the fluorescent lights, humiliation returned, but he didn't react. Couldn't afford to. As they guided him toward the elevator, another notification pulsed inside the boardroom. Unauthorized credential simulation detected. Then vanished. Marisol's eyes widened at her monitor. "Wait," she whispered. The elevator doors closed on the night cleaner as security escorted him down. Inside that sealed metal box, the hum intensified. Not mechanical, digital. The countdown had shifted from reconnaissance to positioning. Someone wasn't just knocking anymore. They were about to walk in, and the only person in the building who fully understood that was the man being escorted away from the very floor that mattered most. The elevator descended with a smooth, indifferent glide. Fluorescent light reflected off stainless steel walls, casting pale shadows across his face. The 2 guards stood stiff beside him, eyes forward, professional but uneasy. "Nothing personal," one of them muttered quietly. "Orders from upstairs." "I know," he replied evenly. The doors opened into the lobby, where marble floors gleamed beneath chandelier light. Midnight silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint hum of ventilation and the distant whir of rotating cameras. Up in the penthouse, Roland Pierce leaned closer to his monitor, watching the escort unfold. Satisfaction flickered across his expression. Control restored. Boundaries enforced. He switched screens, returning to financial dashboards. For half a second, the graph stuttered. Then stabilized. He frowned. Downstairs, the night cleaner resumed mopping the wide expanse of lobby tile. His movements were methodical, almost meditative. But his attention wasn't on the floor, it was on the security desk's monitor wall behind him. Server room feed. Boardroom feed. Hit office feed. He adjusted his cart slightly, angling himself so reflections in the polished marble carried faint screen glows toward him. Subtle, distorted, but enough. The red flicker appeared again, longer this time. Marisol's voice suddenly echoed faintly from the security desk phone. "Can you patch me through to facilities? I need confirmation on internal network routing." The guard lifted the receiver. "Facilities is off rotation. It's urgent. Define urgent." A pause. "Define why my logs are rewriting themselves." The guard exchanged a glance with his colleague, then shrugged. "I'll send a message." The cleaner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Logs rewriting themselves meant persistence access. Whoever was inside wasn't probing anymore, they were embedding. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Leela again. He stepped toward the revolving doors, pretending to wipe fingerprints from the glass before checking the screen. A short voice message this time. "Dad, my chest feels tight tonight. Not bad, just weird, but I took my meds." His breath caught for a fraction of a second. "You okay?" He whispered instinctively, though she couldn't hear him yet. Another message followed quickly. "I'm fine, promise. Don't worry." Worry wasn't optional. He typed back, "I'll be home soon. If it gets worse, call Mrs. Donnelly next door." He slid the phone away, heart pounding once before settling. He couldn't lose this job. Not now, not ever. Upstairs, Rollins' screen froze for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds in a live market environment felt like an eternity. He tapped his mouse. The cursor lagged before catching up. "What is this?" He muttered. An automated notification popped up. External authentication attempt blocked. He leaned back, irritated but unconcerned. "Good," he said to himself. Blocked. He didn't notice the second line that appeared half a second later before vanishing. External authentication rerouted. In the IT office, Marisol's monitor flashed red. Unauthorized encryption string detected. Her pulse spiked. No, she ran a command to isolate the source. The system responded, access denied. That wasn't possible. She tried again. Access denied. Her throat went dry. In the lobby, the cleaner stopped mid-swipe. The hum intensified, not audible to most but perceptible in the subtle flicker of overhead lights. He looked up. Every screen on the security wall blinked simultaneously. Black. Then back. Then black again, longer this time. The guard stiffened. "What was that?" one asked. "Probably a system refresh," the other replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Above them, the building's core network rerouted traffic through executive credentials. In the penthouse, Rollins' entire dashboard went dark. The skyline reflection in his window remained bright and indifferent, but his monitors were black. "What the hell?" he snapped, standing abruptly. His phone buzzed. Marisol. He answered instantly. "Fix it. I'm trying," she said, breath uneven. "It's not a glitch. It's encryption. Something spreading through executive-level access that's impossible. We have, sir, it's happening." In the lobby, every screen turned blood red. A single line of white text appeared across them. File system lock initiated. Countdown, 09:59, 09:58. The guard stared in shock. The mop slipped from his hand, clattering softly against marble. 9 minutes. 9 minutes until total data encryption. 9 minutes until tomorrow's investor stream became a public collapse. Upstairs, Rollins' confident posture cracked for the first time. "What do they want?" he demanded. The answer appeared on every screen simultaneously. Transfer 40 million USD in cryptocurrency. Failure results in permanent data erasure. The countdown ticked to 0912. Marisol's voice trembled through the phone. They're using layered encryption. I can't even see the origin. Roland's eyes darted to the security feed. There, in the lobby, beneath the red glow of ransom text, stood the man he'd just humiliated. Still, watching. Not panicking, not confused, just calculating. And for the first time that night, Roland Pierce felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Helplessness. It crept up Roland Pierce's spine like cold water as the countdown burned red across every screen in his building. 0857. 0856. Shut it down, he barked into the phone. Kill the network. Pull the plug if you have to. I can't just. Marisol's voice cracked. If we sever it blindly, we could trigger the wipe sequence faster. It's designed to punish panic. Then stop it. I'm trying. In the lobby, the red glow reflected off polished marble, painting the ceiling in emergency light. The guards stepped back from the security desk as if the screens themselves were dangerous. The cleaner bent slowly, picked up the fallen mop, and set it upright in the bucket. 0742. He walked toward the desk, boots echoing sharply now. Sir. One guard warned, uncertain. You need to. Call it, he said quietly. They're all ready. Put her on speaker, something in his tone cut through the chaos. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. The guard hesitated, then pressed the button. Marisol's breath came through the speaker in quick pulls. Who is that? It's the janitor, the guard replied awkwardly. A pause. Then, what? He stepped closer to the monitor wall, eyes scanning the ransom code streaming along the bottom of the display. Layered, obfuscated, but familiar. They're not encrypting everything at once, he said calmly. They're staging it in tiers. Executive credentials first, financial archives second, public-facing assets last. Silence filled the lobby. How would you, Marisol began. Because that's how you maximize leverage without tipping the system too early, he finished. 0701. Upstairs, Roland gripped his desk. Who is talking? The cleaner, Marisol replied faintly. Get him away from my systems. The man in the lobby exhaled slowly. If you isolate node clusters 3 and 7 right now, he continued evenly, you can slow the cascade. They're using mirrored credentials to jump laterally. Break the mirror. Marisol stared at her screen. Node clusters 3 and 7 were flashing amber, minor irregularities she hadn't prioritized. How do you know that? She whispered. Because they want you looking at the loud signals while they slip through the quiet ones. 0633. Roland's jaw tightened. Don't listen to him. He's not authorized. Another wave of screens flickered. One monitor in the penthouse office went permanently black. Roland's pulse spiked. Marisol, he snapped. Fix this now. She swallowed hard and rerouted cluster 3. The red pulse slowed slightly. 0611. She shifted to cluster 7. For 2 seconds, the countdown froze, then resumed at 0558. It worked, she breathed. In the lobby, the guard stared at the cleaner as if seeing him for the first time. Who are you? One asked under his breath. He didn't answer. Upstairs, Roland felt the shift. He hated it. Patch me into the lobby, he ordered. His voice thundered from hidden speakers. You, he said sharply. Step away from that desk. The man looked up at the nearest camera. For a brief second, their eyes met through glass and wires. If you'd prefer to wire $40 million to criminals, I can step away, he replied evenly. But you have less than 6 minutes. The guards froze. Marisol spoke again, urgency sharpening her tone. Sir, he's right about the tiered structure. I see the pattern now. It's military-grade encryption, military-grade. The word landed heavily in the penthouse. 0512. Roland's control was slipping through his fingers like sand. What do you need? He demanded finally, pride cracking. The cleaner's gaze returned to the code. I need direct access to the executive server room, he said calmly, not remote, physical. That's restricted. So is losing your entire company. The countdown ticked. 0447. Roland hesitated only a second longer. Grant him temporary clearance, he ordered through clenched teeth. The guard at the desk blinked. Sir, do it. A green light flashed on the security panel beside the elevator. Temporary access granted. The cleaner stepped back from the desk, picking up his cart handle. You're taking that with you? The guard asked, bewildered. He gave the faintest nod. Always bring your tools. As the elevator doors slid open, red light pulsed across stainless steel walls. 0419. He stepped inside alone. Before the doors closed, he glanced once at the camera. If you're still watching, he said evenly, subscribe with the bell on. Because what happens in the next 4 minutes will decide who really belongs in this building. The doors shut. Upward. In the penthouse, Roland didn't know whether to feel furious or relieved. In the IT office, Marisol rerouted secondary firewalls, buying seconds. Just seconds. The elevator climbed. 0341. Inside that rising steel box stood a man in worn boots and latex gloves, and beneath the uniform, the quiet precision of someone who had faced countdowns far more deadly than this. The building trembled faintly, not from structural strain, but from digital war. And for the first time that night, the CEO wasn't watching a cleaner. He was waiting for him. The elevator doors opened onto the executive level with a soft chime that felt almost mocking beneath the crimson pulse of emergency lights. The hallway that had swallowed his humiliation less than an hour ago now flickered in warning. Countdown numbers glowed across wall-mounted displays. 0318. He stepped out, pushing the cart forward. The carpet muffled his boots, but urgency pressed against his ribs like a tightening band. Cameras tracked his movement, but no one ordered security to remove him this time. At the end of the corridor, reinforced glass doors sealed the executive server room. A biometric panel blinked green. Temporary clearance. He pressed his thumb against the scanner. The lock clicked open. Cold air rushed out to meet him, heavy with ozone and machine heat. Racks of servers towered in symmetrical rows, LED lights blinking in frantic rhythm. The hum here wasn't subtle anymore, it roared, a mechanical heartbeat accelerating toward failure. At 0254. Upstairs, Roland stood rigid behind his desk, watching through internal feeds. His reflection in the dark window looked smaller now. Marisol, he snapped. Is he inside? Yes, she said breathlessly. He's in the server vault. Keep recording everything. As if documentation would restore control. Inside the vault, the cleaner parked the cart against the wall and pulled off his rubber gloves. Beneath them, steady hands flexed once before moving to the nearest terminal. He didn't sit, he scanned. Encryption threads snaked across monitors in layered waves. The attackers weren't amateurs, they'd built a cascading lock, each layer triggering the next if interrupted incorrectly. 0231. He spoke quietly toward the ceiling camera. I need admin override on executive credentials. Roland hesitated only a fraction this time. Granted, Marisol typed rapidly, granting temporary access. A new console window opened before him. He moved fast now, not recklessly, but decisively. Fingers flew across keys with muscle memory born in windowless command centers far from corporate towers. Cluster 3 stabilized, Marisol reported. 7 is holding. They're about to trigger the secondary wipe, he replied evenly. They planted a failsafe in the financial archive. How do you know that? She asked again, disbelief still clinging to her voice. Because I would have 0158. He accessed the mirrored credential system, tracing the unauthorized handshake. It branched across multiple offshore servers, masked behind legitimate employee IDs. They cloned executive tokens, he muttered. Smart. Rollin leaned closer to his monitor. Can you stop it? Silence for 2 seconds. Then, yes. The word didn't carry arrogance. It carried certainty. 0137. He isolated the mirror path and severed it manually, rerouting internal authentication through a cold backup channel rarely used. It was risky. If mistimed, it could accelerate the wipe. Sweat gathered at his temple despite the chilled air. He adjusted firewall rules line by line, bypassing automated systems that had already been compromised. Marisol watched his commands scroll across her mirrored display. Those protocols, they're not corporate standard, she whispered. No, he replied. They're defensive countermeasures, 0112. The countdown flickered, 0111, 0110. Then stalled. The red digits froze at 0109. Roland's breath caught audibly through the speaker feed. Did you? Not yet, he interrupted. They'll try to restart the clock. As if summoned by his words, the numbers blinked. 0108, 0107. He moved again, this time injecting a false response signal back through the breach channel. They think the transfer is processing, he explained calmly, buying us confusion on their end. Marisol stared at her screen. You're feeding them a ghost transaction, yes, 0052. The encryption threads began unraveling from the outer layers inward, not cleanly but enough. Server lights shifted from red to amber, then amber to green. Roland exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Finish it, he ordered, though the command sounded more like a plea. He initiated a deep purge protocol, isolating corrupted files into a quarantined segment before wiping the malicious code entirely. Alert 29. The countdown glitched. Alert 28. Alert 17. Alert 03. The numbers vanished. Every screen in the building went black. For one endless second, silence swallowed everything. Then monitors rebooted. Normal dashboards reappeared. Financial graphs, security feeds, clean systems, no ransom message, no red glow, just quiet hum and blinking green LEDs. Inside the server vault, he stepped back from the console slowly, shoulders lowering as tension drained from his spine. It's contained, he said simply. Marisol let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. You stopped it. Up in the penthouse, Roland gripped the edge of his desk. Confirm full integrity, he demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier bite. Marisol ran diagnostics. All primary systems restored. No data loss detected. Relief rippled through the building like a physical wave. In the server room, the cleaner reached for his gloves again, sliding them back on with quiet practicality. The hum of machines returned to its normal cadence. He glanced once at the ceiling camera. Next time, he said evenly, watch the systems, not the people holding mops. Upstairs, Roland had no response, because the man he'd mocked less than an hour ago had just done what millions of dollars in cybersecurity contracts could not. And for the first time since the countdown began, the building wasn't trembling. The balance of power was. For several seconds after the screen stabilized, no one spoke. The server room lights blinked steady green, calm and indifferent, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The hum returned to its normal rhythm, cooling fans spinning, processors cycling, the quiet heartbeat of a corporation that had nearly flatlined. He removed his gloves slowly, flexing his fingers once before resting his palms against the cold metal edge of the console. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last 3 minutes now drained in a controlled descent. He didn't celebrate. He assessed. "Run a secondary integrity scan," he said toward the camera. "Don't trust the first clean result." Marisol, still in her glass office down the hall, nodded instinctively even though he couldn't see her. "Already running it," she replied, voice steadier now. "Archive layers are intact. Financial ledgers untouched. Public servers stable." In the penthouse, Roland Pierce sank into his leather chair, staring at the restored dashboards. The skyline beyond his window shimmered, unaware of how close he'd come to watching his empire collapse in real time. "How?" he asked finally, the word barely audible. The speaker in the server room carried his voice. "How did you know what to do?" He looked up at the camera, expression unreadable. "Pattern recognition," he answered simply. "That's not an answer. It is if you've seen the pattern before." Silence lingered again, but this time it felt different, less charged with panic, more weighted with realization. Marisol stepped out of her office and moved down the corridor toward the server vault, heels clicking against polished flooring. The executive level, once a symbol of exclusion, now felt like neutral ground. She stopped just outside the glass doors, watching him through the pane. "You said military grade," she called carefully. "What does that mean exactly?" He hesitated, then pushed open the door. "It means whoever built that ransomware understood layered defense architecture," he replied evenly. "They weren't guessing. They were testing response times before committing." Her eyes sharpened. "And you knew how to counter it?" "Yes." "Because?" He studied her for a moment. She wasn't accusing. She was connecting dots. "Because I used to build systems meant to survive that kind of attack," he said quietly. The words hung in the chilled air. In the penthouse, Roland leaned forward. "Used to?" The man stepped away from the console, pulling his cart slightly aside as if reclaiming the physical reminder of his current role. "Military cyber defense," he said calmly. "Specialized in breach containment. Infrastructure protection." Marisol's breath caught softly. "You're telling me our night cleaner wasn't always a night cleaner," he finished. The simplicity of it disarmed her more than arrogance ever could have. Roland stood abruptly. "Why are you pushing a mop in my building if you have that background?" There it was again, my building. He didn't flinch. "Because medical insurance matters more than pride," he replied. Marisol's gaze softened slightly. Roland's expression shifted, confusion wrestling with discomfort. "You could have applied for a corporate role after a divorce and a failed consultancy?" He said evenly. "Gaps on Arsums raise eyebrows. Night shifts don't." The CEO had no immediate response to that. Down the corridor, 2 security guards lingered awkwardly, pretending to check panels while clearly listening. The same men who had escorted him down earlier now avoided meeting his eyes. Marisol checked her tablet again. Integrity scan complete. No residual encryption threads. He was right about the secondary failsafe in financial archives. Roland exhaled slowly. The word right echoed louder than any insult he'd thrown earlier. He moved toward the elevator, straightening his jacket, restoring posture piece by piece. "Stay there," he ordered into the speaker. "I'm coming down." The line went dead. In the server room, the former officer slipped his gloves fully back on and adjusted the mop handle. Practical. Grounded. No performance. "You didn't have to step in," Marisol said quietly. "Yes, I did." "For the company?" He shook his head slightly. "For my daughter." Understanding dawned in her expression. "The insurance?" He nodded once. The elevator chimed at the end of the hall. Doors opened. Roland stepped out onto the executive floor, no longer shielded by screens. His polished shoes contrasted sharply with rubber soles on industrial carpet. He walked toward the server vault, slowing as he approached the glass door. For the first time that night, there were no cameras between them, no intercom distortion, just two men standing in the same chilled air. Roland studied him carefully now, not as a trespasser, not as staff, but as the reason his company still existed intact. "You prevented a $40 million ransom," the CEO said quietly, "and potential market collapse." He said nothing. Roland's jaw tightened as pride battled gratitude. "You should have told someone what you were capable of. And would you have listened?" he asked calmly. The question landed clean. Outside the glass walls, executives were beginning to arrive, summoned by emergency alerts. Word was spreading quickly. The story would move through corridors by morning. Roland glanced at the blinking servers, then back at the man he'd mocked. "Come to the boardroom," he said finally. "We need to discuss what happens next." He nodded once, pushing the cart forward. The same corridor that had echoed with humiliation now carried something else entirely. Recognition. The word lingered in the air as they stepped out of the server vault and into the executive corridor. Red emergency lights had faded, replaced by steady white illumination that felt almost too calm after the chaos. Executives gathered near the boardroom doors, murmuring in tight clusters, silk ties loosened, faces pale beneath expensive composure. He pushed the cart beside him, wheels rolling softly over carpet that once seemed forbidden territory. Roland walked half a step ahead, posture rigid but no longer towering. The shift was subtle yet unmistakable. Inside the boardroom, the long glass table reflected the city skyline in fractured lines. Screens along the walls displayed restored dashboards and a scrolling notification, "System stable." Board members turned as they entered. "That's him?" One whispered. "The janitor?" Another murmured. Roland cleared his throat. He neutralized the breach. Silence fell heavy and absolute. Marisol stepped in behind them, tablet in hand. "It was a coordinated ransomware deployment," she explained quickly. "Military-level architecture. If not for his intervention, we would have lost everything." Eyes shifted toward the man in work boots standing near the head of the table. He remained still, hands resting lightly on the cart handle, gaze steady but unassuming. A board member leaned forward. "What exactly did you do?" He answered without theatrics. "Isolated mirrored credentials. Redirected authentication through cold backups, fed a false transfer signal to stall their trigger, then purged the embedded threads." Several executives blinked. "That's not in our corporate protocol," one said faintly. "No," he agreed. Roland watched him closely. The same voice that had been dismissed hours earlier now carried authority without raising volume. "You built countermeasures faster than our contracted cybersecurity firm," Roland said slowly. "How?" He met the CEO's gaze evenly. "Experience." A board member exchanged glances with another. "We need him consulting immediately." "Tonight." Roland hesitated. The hesitation wasn't about competence anymore. It was about pride, about authority, about acknowledging publicly that the person he'd humiliated was now indispensable. He inhaled sharply. "Effective immediately," he announced, voice-controlled but firm. "He will assist in auditing all executive-level security protocols." The room absorbed the statement. The janitor, auditing executives. He didn't react outwardly. But something steady and protective rose inside him, not for himself, but for what this meant. Insurance, stability, leverage to secure his daughter's future. Marisol stepped closer. "We should also trace the origin servers. There's a chance this attack exploited internal shortcuts." Her words carried implication. Roland's jaw tightened again. Internal shortcuts. He knew exactly what she meant. cost-saving measures, streamlined access for executive convenience, reduced authentication layers to save seconds during meetings, seconds that had nearly cost millions. A board member looked directly at him. Were any of those shortcuts approved at your level? The question hung sharp as glass. Roland didn't answer immediately. Before he could deflect, the man beside the cart spoke calmly. The breach exploited mirrored executive tokens, he said. If authentication layers had remained at standard depth, it would have taken them longer to escalate. Not accusatory, just factual. The room shifted perceptibly. Marisol tapped her tablet. He's right. The attackers moved fastest through high-level credentials. Eyes turned back to Roland. For a moment, the CEO looked smaller than the skyline behind him. He cleared his throat. We'll conduct a full internal review. It wasn't an admission, but it was movement. The man in work boots adjusted his grip on the cart slightly. This won't be the last attempt, he added quietly. They'll test again. Probably differently. A board member leaned forward. Can you prepare us? Yes, no hesitation. The answer settled like foundation beneath cracked marble. Roland studied him once more, then addressed the room. We'll convene again in 30 minutes with a full action plan. Executives began filing out, murmuring, glancing back at the unlikely figure at the center of the table. As the room cleared, Roland approached him privately. You understand, he said quietly, that this changes things. It changes priorities, he replied evenly. Roland's gaze sharpened. What do you want? The question was direct, transactional. He considered for half a second. Stability, he said. Nothing extravagant, Roland frowned slightly. Define stability, healthcare coverage, a formal role, clear authority when security is involved. Direct, measured, no greed. Roland exhaled slowly. You'll have it. For the first time that night, something close to humility touched his expression. Before they could continue, Marisol stepped back in. We should prepare a public statement before markets open. Investors need reassurance. Roland nodded stiffly. Draft something. She hesitated, then glanced at the man beside the cart. You might want to stay with us for that, she said carefully. Transparency matters. He gave a small nod. If you're still watching this unfold, subscribe with the bell on, because the next move won't just repair systems, it'll reshape power inside this building. The boardroom lights dimmed slightly as dawn began to hint along the horizon. The same corridor that once echoed with dismissal now carried preparation. And for the first time since he'd stepped into this tower wearing a maintenance badge, he wasn't standing where power never looked. Power was looking directly at him. Dawn pressed faint gray light against the boardroom windows, softening the skyline's hard edges. Inside, tension lingered like static after lightning. Executives had retreated to smaller clusters, phones pressed to ears, voices hushed but urgent. He stood near the head of the glass table now, not seated, not claiming authority, just positioned where he could see every screen. Marisol projected a system map across the wall. Primary breach vector confirmed, she said. They entered through cloned executive tokens tied to reduced authentication layers. The word reduced seemed to echo. Roland remained at the far end of the table, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. The system map pulsed faintly as data reassembled into clarity. Offshore routing, masked IP clusters, timed escalation patterns. They'll try again, the former officer said quietly, but not the same way. Now they know we can counter layered encryption. Next time they'll aim for human error. Phishing? One board member asked. Or internal fatigue, he replied. Late-night approvals. Assumptions. Trust exploited. Marisol nodded. He's right. They'll shift from brute encryption to behavioral manipulation. Rollins' jaw tightened at the implication. The breach had exposed more than vulnerability, it had exposed arrogance. He turned toward the man in work boots. "Walk us through what needs to change." The phrasing carried weight. Not tell us what to do, not suggest. Walk us through. He stepped forward slightly, hands resting lightly against the table's edge. Reinstate full authentication depth, he began evenly. No executive exceptions. Rotate token keys weekly instead of monthly. Segment financial archives from public broadcast systems permanently. A board member scribbled notes rapidly. Independent oversight, he added. Security shouldn't report solely to executive operations. It creates blind spots. That one landed harder. Rollins exhaled through his nose. Meaning, the CEO asked carefully, meaning security decisions can't be influenced by convenience. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Marisol broke it gently. "He's not wrong." The former officer continued without pressing advantage. "Also, run a silent audit on all mirrored credentials. If one was cloned successfully, others may have been tested." Another board member looked uneasy. "Are we still exposed?" "Not at this moment," he replied. But resilience isn't built in reaction. It's built in discipline. Rollins moved to the window, staring down at the city beginning to stir. Delivery trucks rolled along quiet streets. Commuters would soon flood sidewalks beneath this tower, unaware how close their investments had come to evaporating. He turned back slowly. "We'll implement the full protocol reset," he said. Immediately. Marisol's eyes flicked toward him, surprised but approving. A communications director entered briskly. "Markets open in 2 hours. Investors are already asking questions about system interruptions." Rollins nodded. "Prepare a briefing." "Transparent or contained?" she asked. The room waited. Contained would protect reputation in the short term. Transparent would risk embarrassment but build trust. Rollins glanced toward the man who had saved him. "What do you recommend?" he asked quietly. The question marked the real shift. "Transparency," came the steady reply. "Brief outage. Attempted breach. Swift containment. Reinforce corrective action, and credit?" The communications director pressed. "Do we disclose internal intervention?" He paused. This wasn't about ego. It was about precedent. "If you frame it correctly," he said, "you don't just reassure investors, you demonstrate strength." Rollins studied him. "Explain." "You show that your security culture values expertise wherever it exists. That resilience doesn't depend on titles." The board absorbed that. It wasn't just advice, it was indictment. Marisol folded her arms thoughtfully. It would send a powerful message. Rollins' shoulders lowered slightly. "Prepare the statement," he said finally. "Full transparency." The communications director nodded and hurried out. The boardroom emptied gradually until only 3 remained: Roland, Marisol, and the man who had walked in with a mop. Roland approached him directly. "You were right about executive shortcuts," he admitted quietly. "I prioritized speed." "And tonight cost you 9 minutes," came the calm response. Roland gave a faint, humorless exhale. 9 minutes that nearly erased everything. He extended his hand. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't forced. It was acknowledgement. The former officer looked at the offered hand for half a second, then shook it. Grip firm. Equal. No subservience. Marisol watched the exchange with quiet understanding. The building had shifted. Not structurally, but culturally. Outside the boardroom, early staff began arriving, whispers spreading about what had happened overnight. Security guards who once escorted him now nodded with something close to respect. He retrieved his cart from where it leaned near the wall. Rollins noticed. "You don't need that anymore," the CEO said. He glanced at the cart. Until paperwork changes, he replied evenly, I still have a shift to finish. Roland almost smiled. As he pushed the cart toward the hallway, dawn light spilled fully into the corridor. The same path that once reflected red ransom glow now shimmered with morning clarity. Behind him, Roland turned back toward the boardroom table, not as a man reclaiming control, but as one preparing to share it. And somewhere deep in the building's network, quiet defenses stood stronger than they had the night before. The boardroom filled again within the hour, but this time not with panic, with cameras. Tripods lined the glass walls. A portable broadcast rig hummed softly near the entrance. The communications team moved with brisk precision, adjusting angles, testing microphones, rehearsing key phrases under their breath. Markets would open soon. Roland stood at the head of the table, jacket buttoned, tie straightened, expression composed but no longer invincible. Behind him, screens displayed a single slide. Security incident resolved. Marisol stood off to one side, tablet in hand, posture steady. And near the edge of the room, slightly outside the arc of executive chairs, stood the man who had walked in with a mop less than 12 hours ago. He hadn't changed clothes yet. There hadn't been time. Roland glanced toward him briefly, then back to the cameras. Are we live? He asked. 30 seconds, a producer replied. Silence settled. In that stillness, the former officer felt the weight of the moment, not as performance, but as pivot. This wasn't about recognition for its own sake. It was about precedent, about whether a corporation built on hierarchy could admit that strength sometimes wore rubber soles. 10 seconds. Roland inhaled. The red recording light blinked on. Good morning, he began smoothly. Last night, Pierce Global experienced an attempted cybersecurity breach targeting executive-level credentials. The statement was clear. Measured. Our internal systems detected and contained the threat before any data loss occurred. There has been no financial compromise. He paused, eyes steady on the lens. But I want to be transparent about something else. Marisol's gaze flicked toward him. This attack exploited security shortcuts implemented at the executive level. That responsibility falls on me. The room went still. Even the camera operator blinked. Roland continued. We will be reinstating full authentication protocols and restructuring oversight to ensure that security decisions are insulated from operational convenience. The words were deliberate, humble without theatrics. And finally, he added, turning slightly, I want to acknowledge the individual whose expertise neutralized this threat. Cameras pivoted instinctively. The man near the wall didn't move. Adrian Vale, Roland said clearly, using his full name for the first time in public. A member of our night facilities staff and a former military cybersecurity defense specialist. A ripple of surprise moved through the production crew. He identified the breach pattern, isolated compromised nodes, and executed containment protocols under extreme time pressure. Pierce Global stands intact this morning because he stepped forward. The acknowledgement hung in the air. Adrian felt every lens turn toward him. For a second, he considered stepping back. Instead, he stepped forward, not dramatically, just enough to stand beside the CEO. Roland extended a hand toward him, not to shake this time, but to include him in the frame. This company values expertise wherever it exists, Roland concluded. Resilience is built on discipline, not titles. The broadcast ended seconds later. Red recording light clicked off. Silence lingered before soft murmurs filled the room. The communications director exhaled. Markets are stabilizing. Early reactions are positive. Marisol allowed herself a small smile. Transparency worked. Roland turned toward Adrian once cameras powered down. You didn't have to stand there, he said quietly. Yes, I did, came the steady reply. If you were going to say my name, it needed a face. Rollin nodded once. Outside the boardroom, staff gathered in cautious curiosity. Whispers moved quickly. That's him. The janitor? He saved the company. Security guards who once blocked his path now stepped aside instinctively as he exited the room. The contrast was sharp. Upstairs in the penthouse office, sunlight spilled across polished wood, erasing the memory of flickering black screens. Rollin stood by the window again, but this time the skyline looked different, not because it had changed, but because he had. Behind him, Adrian stood near the doorway, cart still beside him like an anchor to reality. You understand, Rollin said slowly, that you could have let us fail. He didn't answer immediately. Yes, he admitted finally. And you didn't. No. Why? He met the CEO's reflection in the glass. Because collapse doesn't just punish the arrogant, he said evenly. It punishes everyone. The words settled heavily. Rollin turned fully toward him. I owe you more than thanks, he said. You owe your employees better protocols, Adrian replied. A faint, reluctant smile touched Rollin's face. Fair. He walked back to his desk and picked up a folder prepared hastily by legal staff. Formal offer, he said, extending it. Director of Cybersecurity Resilience. Full authority over protocol decisions. Healthcare coverage effective immediately. Adrian took the folder, flipping it open briefly. Stable salary. Comprehensive benefits. No probationary clause. He closed it. I'll accept, he said quietly. On one condition. Roland raised an eyebrow. Security decisions remain insulated from executive override. A beat. Then, agreed, they shook hands again, this time not as adversary and subordinate, but as partners. And outside the tower, as markets opened and headlines began to circulate, the story of a night shift cleaner who stopped a corporate collapse traveled faster than the ransomware ever could. And outside the tower, as markets opened and headlines began to circulate, the story of a night shift cleaner who stopped a corporate collapse traveled faster than the ransomware ever could. By mid-morning, Pierce Global's lobby no longer felt like neutral ground, it felt like a crossroads. Employees gathered in small clusters near the security desk, voices lowered but charged with disbelief. That was him? I saw the broadcast. He's been here for months. Adrian stepped out of the executive elevator, no longer pushing the cart. The mop and bucket had been quietly wheeled away by another staff member at Rollin's instruction. For the first time since he'd taken the night shift, his hands were empty. Strange how exposed that felt. Marisol approached from across the marble floor, tablet tucked against her side. HR is finalizing paperwork, she said, voice steady but warmer than before. Legal's drafting internal protocol changes. He nodded. Good. They're also drafting a press feature, she added carefully. Your background. Military service. Consultancy. The whole story. His jaw tightened slightly. Keep it focused on the systems, she studied him for a moment. You don't want the spotlight. I want stability. That answer hadn't changed. Across the lobby, two of the security guards who had escorted him earlier stood awkwardly near the desk. One cleared his throat as Adrian walked past. Sir, the guard said quietly. He paused. We didn't know. He held the man's gaze for a second, then gave a small nod. You followed orders. It wasn't forgiveness. It was understanding. Upstairs, Rollin stood in the boardroom again, this time alone. The glass table reflected sunlight instead of red warning code. He traced a finger along its surface absently, replaying the night in his mind. Control had always meant surveillance, hierarchy, visible authority. But resilience, that had come from somewhere he hadn't bothered to look. His assistant entered softly. The internal memo is ready. We're announcing his appointment. Send it, Roland replied. And the facilities team? Roland hesitated. Full review, he said finally. Pay scale adjustments, training access, recognition pathways. His assistant blinked, surprised. For all levels? For all levels. Downstairs, Adrian's phone vibrated. He stepped toward the revolving doors, sunlight warming his face as he answered. Dad? Lila's voice carried brightness this time. I saw it. She burst out. Mrs. Donnelly showed me on her tablet. You were on TV. A slow breath escaped him. You feeling okay? He asked first. I'm good, she said quickly. But, is it true? You stopped bad guys? He smiled faintly, leaning one shoulder against the cool glass. I helped fix something, he said gently. That's what heroes say, she replied. The word tightened something in his chest. I'm not a hero, he murmured. I'm your dad. That's the same thing, she insisted. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. I'll be home soon, he said, and we'll talk about it over that cookie you saved me. She laughed softly. Okay, but don't be late. The call ended. He stood there for a moment longer, watching pedestrians move along the sidewalk outside. Life continuing, markets stabilizing, no one on the street knowing how close a digital catastrophe had come. Behind him, Roland's voice echoed from the lobby staircase. Adrian. He turned. The CEO descended the final steps without entourage or camera crew this time. I sent the memo, Roland said. You're officially Director of Cybersecurity Resilience. Effective immediately? Adrian asked. Yes, a pause settled between them, not tense, just reflective. I also authorized a full compensation review for facilities staff, Roland added, and internal advancement programs. Adrian regarded him carefully. That wasn't in our agreement. No, Roland admitted, but it should have been. Silence lingered. Roland glanced around the lobby, the marble, the glass, the uniforms moving quietly through the space. I built this company believing leadership meant being watched, he said slowly. Last night taught me it means listening. Adrian didn't respond with praise. He simply inclined his head slightly. Thank you, Roland said finally, not as CEO to employee, but as one man to another. The words felt different now. Earned. As Roland walked away, employees parted respectfully for Adrian without being told. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. He looked up toward the executive floors, remembering red countdown numbers and the sting of humiliation. Then he looked down at his own reflection in the polished marble. Still the same man. Just finally seen. And somewhere deep in the building's network and culture, the reset was complete. By late afternoon, sunlight poured through the lobby atrium in wide golden sheets, washing away the last traces of tension. Employees moved with renewed purpose, conversations quieter but steadier. The building felt different, not because of new technology humming in hidden rooms, but because something unspoken had shifted in plain sight. Adrian stood near the reception desk, reviewing final protocol drafts on a tablet Marisol had handed him. Authentication layers restored, oversight structures separated, executive overrides removed. Disciplined, transparent, he handed the tablet back. This will hold, he said quietly. Marisol nodded. It will, and so will you. He allowed the faintest smile. That's the plan. Outside, a car pulled up near the curb, small and practical. Mrs. Donnelly's sedan. Through the glass doors, he saw a familiar figure climb out, dark hair catching sunlight, backpack bouncing slightly against her shoulders. Lila. She pushed through the revolving doors with wide eyes, looking up at the towering ceiling as if stepping into a museum. Dad. The word echoed softly through the atrium. Heads turned, not with curiosity this time, but warmth. He crouched slightly as she ran into his arms. She felt small and solid and real, grounding him more firmly than any title ever could. "You work here?" she asked, peering around at marble floors and sweeping staircases. "I do," he said. She looked up at him seriously. "Are you still cleaning?" He considered the question carefully. "I'm protecting it now," he answered. Her brow furrowed for a second, then she nodded as if that made perfect sense. Roland watched from a distance near the staircase, hands loosely at his sides. He didn't interrupt, didn't announce himself. Instead, he approached slowly. "You must be Lila," he said gently. She turned, studying him with open curiosity. "Yes, I'm Roland. The boss?" she asked bluntly. A faint chuckle escaped him. Something like that she looked back at her father. "He yelled at you." The lobby fell quiet again, tension flickering in subtle glances. Adrian exhaled softly. "That's over," he said. Roland didn't flinch from the child's honesty. "Yes," he said quietly, "and I was wrong." The simplicity of the admission carried weight. Leela considered him for a long moment, then nodded once, satisfied. "Okay," she said. And just like that, the building felt lighter. Roland extended a small access badge toward Adrian, not a temporary clearance, not a facilities tag, a permanent executive-level credential. "No exceptions," Roland said quietly. "Full authority." Adrian accepted it. Not as a trophy, as responsibility. Around them, employees resumed movement. Conversations returned. Work continued. But something fundamental had changed. Facilities staff straightened slightly when passing through corridors. Security guards offered genuine nods instead of guarded ones. Teams began restructuring protocols with collaborative urgency instead of isolated stress. Recognition had rippled outward. Later, as they stepped back outside into cooling evening air, Leela slipped her hand into his. "You didn't tell me you were that important," she said softly. He looked down at her. "I'm important to you," he replied. "That's what I meant," she said. He smiled, squeezing her hand gently. Behind them, Pierce Global's tower rose against the sky, glass reflecting sunset in quiet brilliance. The same building that had once seemed to exist above him now felt different. Not conquered. Balanced. He paused before they reached the car, glancing back once more. Power didn't always live in corner offices or camera feeds. Sometimes it stood in service corridors, unnoticed, waiting for the moment it was needed. And when that moment came, it didn't shout. It acted. If this story moved you, ask me for the next story title you want to hear. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. He missed his daughter's recital for work. The CEO showed up in his seat instead. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? Pack your things. You're suspended, the principal said, her voice echoing across the office while teachers watched the orphan girl like she'd just committed a crime against the entire school. They said she hacked the academy's security network and endangered the reputation of the most prestigious school in Washington. But the girl didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't beg. She only waited quietly beside the desk because within minutes a call would reach that office from the Pentagon, and everyone in the room would realize they had just suspended the wrong student. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This wasn't really about school discipline. It was about power, misjudging quiet brilliance. Before I show you the exact moment the Pentagon demanded to speak with the suspended student by name, you need to see how it started. She stood there, a thin backpack hanging from one shoulder, eyes steady despite the whispers circling the office. Mara Cade had learned long ago that shouting never helped when powerful people had already decided who you were. So she simply watched the principal slide the suspension form across the desk. Dr. Helena Voss didn't look angry. She looked certain. certain the scholarship orphan had finally proven she didn't belong among diplomats' children and tech billionaires' heirs. The office smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, symbols of a world that rarely noticed students who arrived by city bus. The girl noticed everything, though. The blinking network monitor in the corner, the muted security alert no one else seemed to understand. Because the signal moving through the school system wasn't random. It was structured, deliberate, dangerous. She had seen code like that before in rooms far away from classrooms. But explaining that now wouldn't change the way the principal looked at her. To them she was just the quiet orphan with the old laptop. And suspending her solved the problem neatly. Across the hall lockers slammed and distant laughter drifted through the doorway. Life at Jefferson Crest Academy was already moving on. But the girl knew something they didn't. The breach in the system was still there, and if nobody stopped it soon, the people calling from Washington wouldn't be asking politely. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and turned toward the door. Behind her, the principal was already telling the secretary to file the suspension immediately. But somewhere miles away, inside a quiet Pentagon monitoring room, a different alarm had just begun. The analysts staring at scrolling code didn't know a school hallway was connected to the attack they were tracking. They only saw an unknown interruption slicing through the hostile program like a precise blade, and the signature inside that interruption belonged to someone trained in methods almost nobody outside their division knew. Back at the academy, the suspended student stepped into the corridor where fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Students passed without noticing the envelope in her hand. Suspension papers always looked ordinary. Just ink and signatures deciding where someone did or didn't belong. She paused beside a computer terminal near the robotics lab. Leo Mercer was inside packing delicate wires into a small metal frame. The younger boy glanced up, his eyes worried. He already knew something bad had happened. Rumors moved faster than announcements in a school like this. The girl set the envelope down beside the keyboard. For a moment, her fingers hovered above the keys. The network map flashed across the monitor, lines of movement racing silently through servers the administrators believed were safe. There it was again. The same creeping signal hiding behind ordinary traffic. She exhaled slowly. Stopping it completely would take access she no longer had. But slowing it down again. That she could still manage. Across campus, the principal was probably celebrating decisive leadership. The thought almost made her smile. Almost. Because none of them realized the problem they blamed on her hadn't ended when they took her access away. It had only started. Somewhere beyond the school walls, powerful people were already following the digital trail she accidentally exposed. And when they finished tracing it, the first place they would call was the network where the interruption happened. Which meant very soon, the phone inside the principal's office would ring. When it did, the quiet suspension of one orphan student was going to become something much harder to ignore. She lifted the envelope again. Leo watched silently from the doorway. "It's okay," he started to say, but she shook her head gently. This wasn't over yet. And somewhere in Washington, a red alert was beginning to flash across a military screen tied to the same school network. Within minutes, someone there would ask a single question. Who interrupted the attack? The answer was already waiting. The robotics lab door creaked softly as the suspended student stepped back into the hallway, the suspension envelope still folded in her hand. Fluorescent lights hummed above, reflecting faintly on the polished floor as students drifted past without noticing anything unusual. To them, this was just another ordinary afternoon at Jefferson Crest Academy. To her, the network map still glowing in her mind said otherwise. Behind the glass wall of the lab, Leo Mercer lingered near the doorway, clutching a small controller for his half-finished robot. The younger boy watched her carefully, like someone trying to understand a storm before it arrived. "You didn't really hack the school, did you?" he asked quietly. The question carried more worry than accusation. She paused beside the lockers, adjusting the worn strap of her backpack. For a moment she considered brushing it off the way most people expected, shrugging and walking away. Instead, she crouched slightly so she was closer to his height. "I fixed something that was already broken," she said calmly. Leo frowned. But the principal said, "I know what she said." Her voice stayed steady, not bitter, not angry, just certain. The hallway speakers crackled faintly as an afternoon announcement echoed through the building. Students continued moving between classrooms, laughing, complaining about homework, unaware of the quiet tension threading through the network cables above their heads. Inside the main administrative office, Dr. Helena Voss stood near the tall windows overlooking the school courtyard. The suspension document was already signed and stamped on her desk. A decisive action. A necessary message. Elite institutions survived on reputation, and she had spent years protecting Jefferson Crest Academy from scandals that could damage its standing among Washington's most powerful families. Allowing a scholarship student to breach the school's systems would send the wrong signal. The principal folded her hands behind her back, watching expensive cars glide through the circular driveway outside. Parents trusted this school to maintain order. Today she had done exactly that. Across the room, the secretary typed quietly, filing reports and answering routine calls. The office smelled faintly of coffee and polished mahogany. Order had been restored. At least, that was what the principal believed. Down the hallway, the suspended student reached the end of the lockers and turned toward the stairwell leading to the front entrance. Each step echoed softly in the quiet corridor. She could still feel the network structure in her head the way a musician remembers notes after hearing a melody once. The hostile signal had been subtle, layered beneath ordinary system traffic. Someone very skilled had hidden it there. When she slowed it down earlier using the robotics lab terminal, she hadn't just interrupted a school prank. The pattern was wrong for that. Too organized. Too patient. She pushed open the stairwell door. Cool air drifted upward from the lobby below. Leo hurried after her, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. "So, what happens now?" he asked. She thought about the blinking signal moving silently through the school's network infrastructure. Thought about the way it had reacted when she disrupted it, like something alive suddenly realizing it had been noticed. "I guess we find out who notices next," she said. The younger boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Sometimes the quiet people were the ones who noticed danger first. Back inside the principal's office, the secretary's phone rang. She picked it up without looking at the caller ID, Jefferson Crest Academy, Administrative Office. A brief pause followed. Then her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Yes, Dr. Voss is here," she said cautiously. Another pause. Her expression changed again, confusion mixing with something closer to concern. "I'm sorry, did you say the Pentagon?" The principal turned slowly from the window. "What is it?" she asked. The secretary lowered the phone slightly. "There's a Colonel Adrian Vale on the line," she said carefully. "He says it's regarding a cybersecurity incident connected to our school network." The principal frowned. That didn't make sense. "Our systems are secure," she replied firmly. "Yes, ma'am, I told him that." The secretary hesitated before raising the receiver again. "He says the matter is urgent." Dr. Helena Voss walked across the office and took the phone. "This is Principal Voss," she said, her voice calm and controlled. How can I help you? A deep, steady voice answered from the other end. Good afternoon, Dr. Voss. This is Colonel Adrian Vale, Pentagon Cyber Defense Division. The principal glanced briefly toward the secretary, who was now watching with open curiosity. I'm calling regarding a network disruption originating from your academy approximately 40 minutes ago. Her posture stiffened slightly. Yes, we handled that, she replied. A student violated school security policies. She's been suspended. There was a brief silence on the line. Then, the colonel spoke again. Dr. Voss, the individual who interrupted that signal may have just prevented a national security breach. The principal blinked. I'm sorry, what? Before we continue, Vale said evenly, I need you to locate a student named Mara Cade immediately. At that exact moment, the suspended girl stepped through the front doors of Jefferson Crest Academy. The late afternoon sun spilled across the marble lobby floor. Behind her, the school continued its ordinary routine. But inside the principal's office upstairs, the meaning of that routine was about to change. Before we continue the story, make sure you subscribe with the bell on